The Soldier and Death, a Russian folk tale told in English by Arthur Ransome. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. A soldier served God and the great Tsar for 25 years, earned 3 dry biscuits, and set off to walk his way home. He kissed his companions with whom he had served so long, and boasted of the feasting there would be in the village when he should come marching home with all his wars behind him. Singing at the top of his voice he was as he set off. But as soon as he was alone on the high road, walking through the forest, he began to think things over, and he thought to himself, "All these years I have served the Tsar, and had good clothes to my back, and my belly full of victuals, and now I am like to be both hungry and cold. Already I've nothing but 3 dry biscuits." Just then he met an old beggar, who stood in the road and crossed himself, and asked alms for the love of God. The soldier had not a copper piece in the world, so he gave the beggar one of his 3 dry biscuits. He had not gone very far along the road when he met a second beggar, who leant on a stick and recited holy words and begged alms for the love of God. The soldier gave him the second of his 3 dry biscuits. And then at a bend in the road he met a third old beggar, with long white hair and beard and loathsome rags, who stood shaking by the roadside, and he begged alms for the love of God. "If I give him my last dry biscuit, I shall have nothing left for myself," thought the soldier. He gave the old beggar half of the 3rd dry biscuit. Then the thought came into his head that perhaps this old beggar would meet the other 2, and would learn that they had been given whole biscuits, while he had only been given a half. "He will be hurt and affronted," thought the soldier, "and his blessing will be of no avail." So he gave the old beggar the other half also of the 3rd of his 3 dry biscuits. "I shall get along somehow," thought the soldier, and was for making forward on his way. But the old beggar put out his hand and stopped him. "Brother," says the old beggar, "are you in want of anything?" "God bless you," says the soldier, looking at the beggar's rags. "I want nothing from you. You're a poor man yourself." "Never mind my poverty," says the old beggar. "Just tell me what you would like to have, and I am well able to reward you for your kind heart." "I don't want anything," said the soldier. "But if you do happen to have such a thing as a pack of cards about you, I'd keep them in memory of you, and they'd be a pleasure to me on the long road." The old beggar thrust his hand into his bosom among his rags, and pulled out a pack of cards. "Take these," says he, "and when you play with them you'll always be winner, whoever may be playing against you. And here's a flour sack for you as well. If you meet anything and want to catch it, just open the sack and tell beasts or birds or aught else to get into it, and they'll do just that, and you can close the sack and do with them what you will." "Thank you kindly," says the soldier, throws the sack over his shoulder, puts the pack of cards in his pocket, and trudges off along the high road, singing an old song. He went on till he came to a lake, where he drank a little water to ease his thirst, and smoked a pipe to put off his hunger, resting by the shore of the lake. And there on the lake he saw 3 wild geese swimming far away. "Now, if I could catch them," thought the soldier, and remembered the sack the old beggar had given him. He opened the sack and shouted at the top of his voice, "Hi, you there, you wild geese, come into my sack!" And the 3 wild geese splashed up out of the water and flew to the bank and crowded into the sack, one after the other. The soldier tied up the mouth of the sack, flung it over his shoulder, and went on his way. He came to a town, and looked for a tavern, and chose the best he could see, and went in there and asked for the landlord. "See here," says he, "here are 3 wild geese. I want one of them roasted for my dinner. Another I'll give you in exchange for a bottle of vodka. The 3rd you shall have to pay you for your trouble." The landlord agreed, as well he might, and presently the soldier was seated at a good table near a window, with a whole bottle of the best vodka and a fine roast goose fresh from the kitchen. When he had made an end of the goose, the soldier laid down his knife and fork, tipped the last drops of the vodka down his throat, and set the bottle upside down upon the table. Then he lit his little pipe, sat back on the bench, and took a look out of the window to see what was doing in the town. And there on the other side of the road was a fine palace, well carved and painted. A year's work had gone to the carving of every door-post and window-frame. But in all the palace there was not one whole pane of glass. "Landlord," says the soldier, "tell me what's the meaning of this? Why is a fine palace like that standing empty with broken windows?" "Oh, it's a good enough palace," says the landlord. "The Tsar built the palace for himself, and there's no living in it because of the devils." "Devils?" says the soldier. "Devils," says the landlord. "Every night they crowd into the palace, and what with their shouting and yelling and screaming and playing cards, and all the other devilries that come into their heads, there's no living in the palace for decent folk." "And does nobody clear them out?" asks the soldier. "Easier said than done," says the landlord. Well, with that, the soldier wishes good health to the landlord, and sets off to see the Tsar. He comes walking into the Tsar's house and gives him a salute. "Your Majesty," says he, "will you give me leave to spend one night in your empty palace?" "God bless you," says the Tsar, "but you don't know what you are asking. Foolhardy folk enough have tried to spend a night in that palace. They went in merry and boasting, but not one of them came walking out alive in the morning." "What of that?" says the soldier. "Water won't drown a Russian soldier, and fire won't burn him. I have served God and the Tsar for 25 years and am not dead. A single night in that palace won't be the end of me." "But I tell you, a man walks in there alive in the evening, and in the morning the servants have to search the floor for the little bits of his bones." "None the less," says the soldier, "if your Majesty will give me leave—" "Oh, get along with you, and God be with you," says the Tsar. "Spend the night there if you've set your heart on it." So the soldier came to the palace and stepped in, singing, through the empty rooms. He made himself comfortable in the biggest room of all, laid his knapsack in a corner, and hung his sword on a nail, sat down at the table, took out his bag of tobacco, filled his little pipe, and sat there smoking, ready for what might come. 12 o'clock sharp, and there was a yelling, a shouting, a blowing of horns, a scraping of fiddles, and every other kind of instrument, a noise of dancing, of running, of stamping, and the palace cram full of devils making themselves at home as if the palace belonged to them. "And you, soldier," cried the devils, "what are you sitting there so glum for, smoking your pipe? There's smoke enough where we have been. Put your pipe in your pocket and play a round of cards with us." "Right you are," says the soldier, "if you'll play with my cards." "Deal them out," shouted the devils, and the soldier put his pipe in his pocket and dealt out the cards, while the devils crowded round the table fighting for room on the benches. They played a game, and the soldier won. They played another, and he won again. The devils were cunning enough, God knows, but not all their cunning could win a single game for them. The soldier was raking in the money all the time. Soon enough the devils had not a penny piece between them, and the soldier was for putting up his cards and lighting his pipe. Content he was, and well he might be, with his pockets bulging with money. "Stop a minute, soldier," said the devils. "We've still got 60 bushels of silver and 40 of gold. We'll play for them if you'll give us time to send for them." "Let's see the silver," says the soldier, and puts the cards in his pocket. Well, they sent a little devil to fetch the silver. 60 times he ran out of the room, and 60 times he came staggering back with a bushel of silver on his shoulders. The soldier pulled out his cards, and they played on, but it was all the same. The devils cheated in every kind of way, but could not win a game. "Go and fetch the gold," says the oldest devil. "Aye, aye, grandfather," says the little devil, and goes scuttling out of the room. 40 times he ran out, and 40 times he came staggering back with a bushel of gold between his shoulders. They played on. The soldier won every game, and all the gold, asked if they had any more money to lose, put his cards in his pocket, and lit his pipe. The devils looked at all the money they had lost. It seemed a pity to lose all that good silver and gold. "Tear him to pieces, brothers," they cried. "Tear him to pieces. Eat him and have done." The soldier tapped his little pipe on the table. "First make sure," says he. who eats whom, and with that he whips out his sack, and says he to the devils, who were all gnashing their teeth and making ready to fall on him, "What do you call this?" "It's a sack," said the devils. "Is it?" says the soldier. "Then, by the word of God, get into it." And the next minute all those devils were tumbling over each other and getting into the sack, squeezing in one on the top of the other until the last one had got inside. Then the soldier tied up the sack with a good double knot, hung it on a nail, and lay down to sleep. In the morning the Tsar sent his servants. "Go," says the Tsar, "and see what has happened to the soldier who spent the night in the empty palace. If the unclean spirits have made an end of him, then you must sweep up his bones and make all clean." The servants came, all ready to lament for the brave soldier, done to death by the unclean, and there was the soldier, walking cheerfully from one room to another, smoking his little pipe. "Well done, soldier! We never thought to see you alive. And how did you spend the night? How did you manage against the devils?" "Devils?" says the soldier. "I wish all men I have played cards against had paid their debts so honestly. Have a look at the silver and gold I won from them. Look at the heaps of money lying on the floor." The servants looked at the silver and gold and touched it to see if it was real, but there was no doubt about that. I wish I had more in my pocket of the same sort. "Now, brothers," said the soldier, "off you go with you as quick as you can. Go and fetch 2 blacksmiths here on the run, and let them bring with them an iron anvil and the 2 heaviest hammers in the forge." The servants asked no questions, but hurried to the smithy, and the 2 blacksmiths came running, with anvil and hammers. Giants they were, the strongest men in all the town. "Now," says the soldier, "take that sack from the nail and lay it on the anvil, and let me see how the blacksmiths of this town can set about their work." The blacksmiths took the sack from the nail. "Devil take it, what a weight!" they said to each other. And little voices screamed out of the sack, "We are good folk, we are your own people." "Are you?" said the blacksmiths, and they laid the sack on the anvil and swung the great hammers up and down, as if they were beating out a lump of iron. The devils fared badly in there, and worse and worse. The hammers came down as if they were going through devils, anvil, earth, and all. It was more than even devils could bear. "Have mercy!" they screamed. "Have mercy, soldier! Let us out again into the world, and we'll never forget you, world without end. And as for this palace, no devil shall put the nail of the toe of his foot in it. We'll tell them all. No one shall come within 100 miles." The soldier let the blacksmiths have a few more blows, just for luck. Then he stopped them and untied the mouth of the sack. The moment he opened it, the devils shot out and fled away to hell without looking right or left in their hurry. But the soldier was no fool, and he grabbed one old devil by the leg, and the devil hung gibbering, trying to get away. The soldier cut the devil's hairy wrist to the bone so that the blood flowed, took a pen, dipped it in the blood, and gave it to the devil, but he never let go of his leg. "Write," says he, "that you will be my faithful servant." The old devil screamed and wriggled, but the soldier gripped him tight. There was nothing to be done. He wrote and signed in his own blood a promise to serve the soldier faithfully wherever and whenever there should be need. Then the soldier let him go, and he went hopping and screaming after the others, and had disappeared in a moment. And so the devils went rushing down to hell, aching in every bone of their hairy bodies. And they called all the other unclean spirits, old and young, big and little, and told what had happened to them. And they set sentinels all around hell, and guards at every gate, and ordered them to watch well, and whatever they did, not on any account to let in the soldier with the flour sack. The soldier went to the Tsar and told him how he had dealt with the devils, and how henceforth no devil would set foot within 100 miles of the palace. "If that's so," says the Tsar, "we'll move at once, and go and live there, and you shall live with me and be honoured as my own brother." And with that there was a great to-do, shifting the bedding and tables and benches and all else from the old palace to the new, and the soldier set up house with the Tsar, living with him as his own brother, and wearing fine clothes with gold embroidery, and eating the same food as the Tsar, and as much of it as he liked. Money to spend he had, for he had won from the devils enough to last even a spending man 1,000 years, and he had nothing to spend it on. Hens don't eat gold, no more do mice, and there the money lay in a corner till the soldier was tired of looking at it. So the soldier thought he would marry, and he took a wife, and in a year's time God gave him a son, and he had nothing more to wish for except to see the son grow up and turn into a general. But it so happened that the little boy fell ill, and what was the matter with him no one knew. He grew worse and worse from day to day, and the Tsar sent for every doctor in the country, but not one of them did him a halfpennyworth of good. The doctors grew richer, and the boy grew no better, but worse, as is often the way. The soldier had almost given up hope of saving his son, when he remembered the old devil who had signed a promise written in his own blood to serve the soldier faithfully wherever and whenever there should be need. He remembered this, and said to himself, "Where the devil has my old devil hidden himself all this time?" And he scarcely said this when suddenly there was the little old devil standing in front of him, dressed like a peasant in a little shirt and breeches, trembling with fright and asking, "How can I serve your Excellency?" "See here," says the soldier, "my son is ill. Do you happen to know how to cure him?" The little old devil took a glass from his pocket and filled it with cold water and set it on the sick child's forehead. "Come here, your Excellency," says he, "and look into the glass of water." The soldier came and looked in the glass. "And what does your Excellency see?" asked the little old devil, who was so much afraid of the soldier that he trembled and could hardly speak. "I see death, like a little old woman, standing at my son's feet." "Be easy," says the little old devil, "for if death is standing at your son's feet, he will be well again. But if death were standing at his head, then nothing could save him." And with that the little old devil lifted the glass and splashed the cold water over the sick child, and the next minute there was the little boy crawling about and laughing and crowing as if he had never been sick in his life. "Give me that glass," says the soldier, "and we'll cry quits." The little old devil gave him the glass, and the soldier gave back the promise which the devil had signed in his own blood. As soon as the little old devil had that promise in his hand, he gave one look at the soldier and fled away, as if the blacksmiths had only that minute stopped beating him on the anvil. And the soldier after that set up as a wise man, and put all the doctors out of business, curing the boyars and generals. He would just look in his glass, and if death stood at a sick man's feet, he threw the water over him and cured him. If death stood at the sick man's head, he said, "It's all up with you," and the sick man died as sure as fate. All went well until the Tsar himself fell ill and sent for the soldier to cure him. The soldier went in, and the Tsar greeted him as his own brother, and prayed him to be quick, as he felt the sickness growing upon him as he lay. The soldier poured cold water in the glass and set it on the Tsar's head, and looked again, and saw death standing at the Tsar's head. "O Tsar," says the soldier, "it's all up with you. Death is waiting by your head, and you will have but a few minutes left to live." "What?" cried the Tsar. "You cure my boyars and generals, and you will not cure me who am Tsar, and have treated you as my own born brother? If I've only a few minutes to live, I've time enough to give orders for you to be beheaded." The soldier thought, and he begged Death. "O Death," says he, "give my life to the Tsar, and kill me instead. Better to die so than to end up being shamefully beheaded." He looked once more in the glass, and saw that the little old woman Death had shifted from the Tsar's head, and was now standing at his feet. He picked up the glass and splashed the water over the Tsar, and there was the Tsar as well and healthy as ever he had been. "You are my own true brother after all," says the Tsar. "Let us go and feast together." But the soldier shook in all his limbs and could hardly stand, and he knew that his time was come. He prayed Death, "O Death, give me just 1 hour to say good-bye to my wife and my little son." "Oh, hurry up," says Death. And the soldier hurried to his room in the palace, said good-bye to his wife, told his son to grow up and be a general, lay down on his bed, and grew iller every minute. He looked, and there was Death, a little old woman, standing by his bedside. "Well, soldier," says Death, "you have only 2 minutes left to live." The soldier groaned, and turning in bed, pulled the flour sack from under his pillow and opened it. "Do you know what this is?" says he to Death. "A sack," says Death. "Well, if it is a sack, get into it," says the soldier. Death was into the sack in a minute, and the soldier leapt from his bed well and strong, tied up the sack with 2 double knots, flung it over his shoulder, and set out for the deep forest of Brian, which is the thickest in all the world. He came to the forest and made his way into the middle of it, hung the sack from the topmost branches of a high poplar tree, left it there, and came home, singing songs at the top of his voice, and full of all kinds of merriment. From that time on there was no dying in the world. There were births every day, and plenty of them, but nobody died. It was a poor time for doctors, and so it was for many years. Death had come to an end, and it was as if all men should live forever. And all the time the little old woman, Death, tied up in a sack, unable to get about her business, was hanging from the top of a tall poplar tree away in Brian Forest. And then one day the soldier was walking out to take the air, and he met an ancient old crone, so old and so ancient that she was like to fall whichever way the wind blew. She tottered along, blown this way and that, like a blade of withered grass. "What an old hag!" said the soldier to himself. "It was time for her to die many years ago." "Yes," says the old crone, with her toothless gum, numbling and grumbling over her words. "Long ago it was time for me to die. When you shut up Death in the sack, I had only an hour left to live. I had done with the world, and the world had done with me, and I would have been glad to be at peace. Long ago my place in heaven was made ready, and it is empty to this day, for I cannot die. You, soldier, have sinned before God and before man. You have sinned a sin that God will not forgive. I am not the only soul in the world who is tortured as I am. Mine is not the only place that is growing dusty in heaven. Hundreds and thousands of us who should have died drag on in misery about the world, and but for you we should now be resting in peace." The soldier began to think, and he thought of all the other old men and women he had kept from the rest that God had made ready for them. "There is no doubt about it," thinks he, "I had better let Death loose again. No matter if I am the first of whom she makes an end. I have sinned many sins, not counting this one. Better go to the other world now, and bear my punishment while I am strong, for when I am very old it will come worse to me to be tortured." So he set off to the forest of Brian, which is the thickest in all the world. He found the poplar tree, and saw the sack hanging from the topmost branches, swinging this way and that as the wind blew. "Well, Death, are you alive up there?" the soldier shouted against the wind. And a little voice, hardly to be heard, answered from the sack, "Alive, little father." So the soldier climbed up the tree, took down the sack, and carried it home over his shoulder. He said good-bye to his wife and his son, who was now a fine young lad. Then he went into his own room, opened the bag, lay down upon the bed, and begged Death to make an end of him. And Death, in the form of a little old woman, crept trembling out of the sack, looking this way and that, for she was very much afraid. As soon as she saw the soldier, she bolted through the door, and ran away as fast as her little old legs could carry her. "The devils can make an end of you if they like," she shrieked, "but you don't catch me taking a hand in it." The soldier sat up on the bed, and knew that he was alive and well. Troubled he was as to what to do next. Thinks he, "I'd better get straight along to hell, and let the devils throw me into the boiling pitch, and stew me until all my sins are stewed out of me." So he said good-bye to everybody, took his sack in his hands, and set off to hell by the best road he could find. Well, he walked on, over hill and valley, and through the deep forest, until he came at last to the kingdom of the unclean. There were the walls of hell and the gates of hell, and as he looked he saw that sentinels were standing at every gate. As soon as he came near a gate, the devil doing sentry guard calls out, "Who goes there?" "A sinful soul come to you to be stewed in the boiling pitch." "And what is that you've got in your hand?" "A sack." And the devil yelled out at the top of his voice and gave the alarm. From all sides the unclean rushed up and began closing every gate and window in hell with strong bolts and bars. And the soldier walked round hell outside the walls, unable to get in. He cried out to the prince of hell, "Let me into hell, I beg you. I have come to you to be tormented, because I have sinned before God and before man." "No," shouted the prince of hell, "I won't let you in. Go away. Go away, I tell you. Go away anywhere you like. There's no place for you here." The soldier was more troubled than ever. "Well," says he, "if you won't let me in, you won't. I'll go away if you will give me 200 sinful souls. I will take them to God, and perhaps when he sees them, he will forgive me and let me into heaven." "I'll throw in another 50, says the prince of hell, "if only you'll get away from here." And he told the lesser devils to count out 250 sinful souls, and to let them out quickly at one of the back doors of hell, while he held the soldier in talk, so that the soldier should not slip in while the sinful souls were going out. It was done, and the soldier set off for heaven with 250 sinful souls behind him, marching in column of route, as the soldier made them, for the sake of order and decency. Well, they marched on, and in the end they came to heaven, and stopped before the very gates of paradise. And the holy apostles, standing in the gateway of paradise, said, "Who are you?" "I am the soldier who hung death in a sack, and I have brought 250 sinful souls from hell, in hope that God will pardon my sins and let me into paradise." And the apostles went to the Lord, and told him that the soldier had come, and brought with him 250 sinful souls. And God said, "Let in the sinful souls, but do not let in the soldier." The apostles went back to the gateway, and opened the gates, and told the souls they might come in. But when the soldier tried to march in at the head of his company, they stopped him and said, "No, soldier, there's no place for you here." So the soldier took one of the sinful souls aside, and gave that soul his sack, and told him, "As soon as you are through the gates of paradise, open the sack, and shout out, 'Into the sack, soldier!' You will do this because I brought you here from hell." And the sinful soul promised to do this for the soldier. But when that sinful soul went through the gates into paradise, for very joy of it, forgot about the soldier, and threw away the sack somewhere in paradise, where it may be lying to this day. And so the soldier, after waiting a long time, went slowly back to earth. Death would not take him. There was no place for him in paradise, and no place for him in hell. For all I know, he may be living yet. End of The Soldier and Death by Arthur Ransome.
Star of the Staff by A. Ellis Henneberger. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Winston Tharp. Morrison was about as likely a cub as ever drifted into the office of the Madison World, with lofty ideas of the journalistic profession and a firm resolve some day to set the nation aflame. It is true that he was a little taken aback when, after a month on probation, he was placed on the salary list at $10 a week. But he had read somewhere that Dana was once a city editor at little more, and he took courage. Duffy, the managing editor, told him he was to be congratulated on getting any salary at all in so short a time. "Why, on the New York blank," he told Morrison, "college students serve 6 months without pay, and are glad for the opportunity. Anyway, you haven't caught the world's style. Watch Sneed's articles, and you'll get a line on what we want." Sneed was the star of the staff, and Morrison always regarded him enviously as he came in from an assignment and tore off reams of stuff. It was a bleak day in January. A heavy snow had fallen, blockading the car lines and putting business to the bad all over town. Sneed tramped into the office with the police reports, which he threw in a heap on Duffy's desk for inspection, and settled himself to write an article on East Side distress. Duffy glanced the reports through and entered the various assignments in his book. This completed, the reporters came forward to receive instructions for the day. "You, Morrison," he said, "look up this distress case. Take it down. Mrs. Edith M. Lindeman, 1125 Calvert Street, 2 children, without food 2 days. Here's an order on the cashier. Buy her food and wood if she needs it, and write a half column, sure." Morrison sallied forth that morning, armed with the office currency, and fought his way through the snowdrifts toward the East Side. It was a peculiarity of the town that one might find wealth and squalor side by side, even in what was known as the exclusive section. But it must be confessed that Morrison was somewhat nonplussed when he read the number 1125 on the door of a veritable mansion. "Here's the devil to pay," thought the reporter as he consulted his notes again. But there were the figures staring him in the face. A maid, neatly attired in cap and apron, answered his ring. Yes, Mrs. Lindeman lived here. And what was his business, please? He felt like a fool as he blurted it out. "A mistake, of course," he finished with a laugh. "Quite a natural one, though," said a quiet voice behind the maid. A woman, evidently the mistress, came forward. She was a strikingly handsome young woman, but her eyes were very sad. "Marie," she continued, "this gentleman, no doubt, is looking for that Italian family in the rear. I had no idea they were in such straits. It is the rear of 1125 you want. The maid will show you." Guided by Marie, Morrison entered an alleyway which emerged on another running just behind the Lindeman house. Ascending a flight of rickety steps, he brought up at the door of a squalid tenement. An hour later, a grocery man and a wood dealer had relieved the immediate wants of the Sonatini family, and Morrison, with 2 receipts made out to the world, was hurrying to the office to write the story of his life. Duffy was knee-deep in copy, but he liked that. He handled all the local, and kept the linotype operators crying for quarter most of the time. Morrison had finished his story and was off on another assignment. Sneed was grinding out a suicide with the usual tear trimmings. Duffy weeded out the copy rapidly, casting the slop, as he called it, right and left, and piling up the spicy matter for the regular 2:00 edition. Morrison's Sonatini story came in for rapid perusal and immediate disfavor. "Damn that cub," muttered Duffy. "Come on, Sneed," he called out. "Cut that story off. I've got a good one for you." He caught up the assignment book. "Take this down. Mrs. Edith M. Lindeman. Got that? 1125 Calvert Street. 2 children. Husband missing. Starving. World sent supplies. Throw a good heartthrob into it." "Hey, Jimmy," to the office boy, "tell the foreman these receipts go on the first page with story. Devin caps in box. Now hustle, Sneed. Tear off that as quick as you can." Morrison got it when he returned. "Now look here, my boy," said Duffy. "You've got to brace up. Get a little style into your stuff. That story of yours would be all very well in the news, for instance, but it won't go here. I had it rewritten. Here is the story as seen through Mr. Sneed's eyes." Morrison was deeply humiliated. He took the copy mechanically and returned to his desk. His glance fell on the manuscript. Interest, surprise, amazement gave place to suppressed but unholy mirth. Sneed's article read, "Thank God," cried Mrs. Edith M. Lindeman of 1125 Calvert Street, "my children will live." In a home made desolate by the desertion of a husband, with gaunt hunger stalking at the door, with 2 tots weak from want of the bare necessities of life, a reporter for the World appeared this morning, and in the twinkling of an eye that dreary abode was changed into a haven of comfort. It was a pathetic story that Mrs. Lindeman had to tell of a husband untrue to his vow to protect her, who had abandoned her in the heart of a cruel winter and left his family to its fate. Tears flowed down the woman's cheeks as she recited the story of his perfidy. "God knows," she told the reporter, "I was a good wife to him." There was more, about half a column more of harrowing details, but Morrison had had enough. His mind was firmly made up. Walking to Duffy's desk, he laid down the copy. "Very good indeed, Mr. Duffy," he said quietly. "But if I could write like that, I wouldn't be working for you at $10 a week." Duffy grunted. "For God's sake, Edith, what sort of a ghastly joke is this?" Andrew K. Lindeman, broker and clubman, stood in the drawing-room of his former home in Calvert Street. He flourished a copy of the World excitedly. The woman took it in silence. As she read the headlines, her face was a study. "The idiots!" she cried. Then the ridiculousness of the thing struck her, and she laughed outright. "You didn't really think we were starving here, did you, Andrew?" she said when she had recovered her breath. "And did you really care? Strange. I thought you had forgotten you had a wife or children." And her eyes regarded him sorrowfully. "That's right," said the man bitterly. "Blame it all on me." "It's the Sonatinis in the rear. A reporter came here this morning, but I saw him myself. I can't imagine how the mistake occurred." "Well, I'll have something to say over there in the morning. Goodbye. I'm going back to the hotel, Edith." The woman looked at him wistfully, but said nothing. He had almost reached the door when there was a shout, and two white-gowned tots rushed through the hall and were caught in their father's arms. "Daddy, Daddy!" they cried in delight. "You was going to stay, Daddy," cried one curly head, "'cause Mama said you was when you came back." "Does Mama want me to stay, do you think, Mildred?" "Oh, yes, Daddy. I heard Mama ask Dodd to send you home to her." An instant later, Daddy was holding a half-faint but happy woman in his arms. Duffy was crushed. The business manager was wild. The entire town of Madison was in hysterics. Wilson, the business manager, had caught the edition, but only after some 5,000 papers had reached the streets. "Nobody but a blank fool would have made such a bull," he stormed. "Lindeman, a well-known broker. Wife lives in a palace. Footman, coachman, automobiles, and all that sort of thing. Why, it'll cost us $10,000 even to compromise it. Didn't anybody in this damned office recognize the name? By gad, I'll cripple the staff. I'll discharge every man." The telephone bell stopped him. Wilson was standing nearby, and he jerked the receiver off the hook. "Eh? Mr. Lindeman, what's that? Oh, yes, I'll send him over right away. Mr. Lindeman, this is Wilson, business manager. I'm going to see you—" "How? Never mind. I assure you, Mr.—" "All right, sir." "Duffy, get hold of that young Morrison and send him to Lindeman's office at once. Tell him to explain the whole business. We've got to throw ourselves on his mercy. Give the story a 2-column display, same place as the other, first edition. Gad, what a lot of fat heads!" And Wilson withered the staff with his glance as he strode toward the elevator. An hour later, Morrison entered the office, smiling. "It's all right, Mr. Duffy. Mr. Lindeman says for you people to rest easy. He won't sue. He's satisfied to let the matter drop. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Duffy, I've got to quit you. Sorry, too, but Mr. Lindeman has offered me a job." Just then the elevator stopped at the office floor. Morrison took it. "Damn that cub," murmured Duffy. End of Star of the Staff by A. Ellis Henneberger.
The White Carnation by Francis Livingston. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Matt Braymiller. On the night that was to have been my last on earth, I made as careful a toilette as though I had been going to a dinner dance or to the opera. Indeed, I had half decided to go to the latter place. It depended on what they were singing and how far my money would carry me. I had just $20 and a little silver in my pocketbook. That was all I had in the world, all that was left of the $40,000 which I had in January when Edgar Brandon took me into his office in the Broad Exchange Building. No, I was not fleeced by Edgar. He was the best friend I ever had, if I had only known enough to appreciate the fact. But I had tried to be a plunger. I thought Ned was too slow, and even after my folly had been brought home to me a half-dozen times, after my own money was almost exhausted, I had persisted in being a fool. Ned had given me a last solemn warning, but there came a chance to recoup. Ah, it was such a sure thing. That tip of George Ellery's on Northeastern. I bought heavily. I was acting quite within my rights, I told myself, in signing the firm's name to the checks, and how pleased Ned would be. Then there came that crash of which everybody knows, and all who are long on Northeastern remember it bitterly. Ned acted like a gentleman. He took up all the checks and made no fuss, but the next day, with a look I can never forget, he said, "Felton, this ends things between you and me. I never wish to see your face again until I have forgotten what you have done, and that will not be in a hurry, I can promise you." That was all. I tried it alone, but fared very ill. I fancied that my dealings when with Brandon were being talked about, and that some of the men on the curb shunned me. It was my imagination. Maybe. I think the truth was that I despised myself. I had my name removed from the waiting list of Brandon's club, where he had placed it, to save my being blackballed. After a little while I resigned from my own club. All this would not have been so bad had I had any money. I had been used to money and to luxurious living all my life, but I had no funds, nor did I know of a way to obtain any. And now I was down to my last dollar, or what amounted to the same thing. I had figured out just what I was to do. There should be a modest little dinner at a quiet French restaurant I knew, a few cigars, a cab, of course, and an orchestra chair at the Metropolitan. I would take another cab after the opera, for I had about settled upon the East River. It was a more vague, a more mysterious region than the North River, which was too familiar, I thought. I remembered from long ago certain rocks at the water's edge on the east side. I would drive over there and dismiss the cab. Then there would be a tall figure standing on the rocks, smoking a cigar and gazing gloomily at the dark water below. The cigar burns to the end. A clock somewhere strikes midnight. The tall figure leaps out and down into the darkness. And that is the last of Richard Felton. I really felt very sorry for myself as I put on my evening coat, and sorry for Edgar, too, when he should hear of my death. As I knotted my tie before the mirror, I noticed something on the left lapel of my coat. I had not had it on for several weeks, and there were 2 moth-holes in the cloth. That was a slight matter to annoy a man about to die, but annoy me it did. I had never been shabby in my life, and I did not wish to go out on this last evening in a shabby coat. But I saw no help for it. I had no other coat. I went out on the street, still thinking of those 2 moth-holes. As I passed a florist's window, I had an idea. I went into the shop and bought a large white double carnation, which I pinned to the lapel in a manner to conceal the defects. I went to the restaurant and ate my dinner, smoking a good cigar afterward while I leisurely watched the other diners, several couples, and 2 or 3 merry parties. At about 8:30 o'clock I took a cab and drove to the Metropolitan. I chose a 4-wheeler in preference to a hansom. I wished to be comfortable, to stretch my legs and smoke. I found the opera was Tristan and Isolde. This did not suit me at all. It was too big, too remote. The tragedy was so stupendous. I think I fancied my own would seem small in comparison. And then the house would be dark, and I did not wish that. Tonight I wished to see beautiful women with flashing jewels, to hear the frou-frou of silken garments, to inhale perfumes suggesting luxury and wealth, to move in the surroundings that had once been mine by right. Traviata, or even Il Barbiere would have done. But the thought of that great, lonely Isolde pouring out her mighty Liebestod in the gloom made me shudder. "Drive up the avenue," I called to the man. I should have liked to go to a ball. A mask would have suited me best. Oh, heaven, how I craved gaiety, light, and laughter tonight. I had such a surfeit of sadness. I thought of all the women I knew and dismissed the idea of calling on any one of them. Alice Lazari I thought of last of all. It would sadden me to go there. I had not seen her for 3 months. Would she be shocked tomorrow when she heard? Bah! I wondered if all suicides were not stupid egoists. Some of the houses of the avenue were shrouded in gloom. There were lights in the windows of others. All looked equally forbidding. There was none that had a welcome for me. This would not do. Time was slipping away. I looked at my watch. 10 o'clock. I heard sounds of music, and from the darkness ahead there loomed a great house ablaze with light. As we drew nearer, I saw many carriages. Gaily dressed women alighted from them and ascended the steps. "Drive around into the side street and stop at the end of the line of carriages there," I said to the man. I got out and walked slowly around past the entrance. It seemed to me I should know who lived here. I looked at the neighboring houses, and gradually I remembered. It was a wealthy steel man, a magnate, the papers called him, lately come from the West. He had a wife with social aspirations and a daughter who was said to be beautiful. What was the name? Ah, yes, Sammis. I did not know them, but that made no difference. My resolve was taken. The sight of all those women and men crowding up the steps acted like a tonic upon me, and gave me courage to do a reckless thing. I would go into that house for an hour and mingle among the guests as one of them. Without a moment's hesitation, I mounted the steps and entered. A page in livery stood at the door of the drawing-room, announcing the guests. I gave him my name, and almost expected to see the people turn in surprise as the boy called out, "Mr. Richard Felton," but no one did so. I walked up to 2 ladies standing in the center of the room and bowed to them. I heard their conventional murmur of pleasure, but did not dare look at their faces. Then I moved away, giving place to others, and looked about me. The great rooms were furnished with magnificence, but there was nothing to offend good taste. Everywhere were flowers. An orchestra was playing somewhere in the hall. I saw no familiar face in the crowd. I became conscious that someone was looking hard at me. I glanced leisurely in the direction from which I felt the stare to come, and saw a stout, red-faced old gentleman with white chin-whiskers. It was Sammis. I recognized him instantly from the newspaper pictures. Uncomfortable as I felt to be suspected thus early, I met his gaze boldly for a moment. Then other people came between us, and I moved away. Decidedly I must bestir myself, and at least appear to know some people, otherwise my adventure was like to end quickly. Yet I felt my spirits rising in spite of the danger of ridicule or humiliation. The thought of approaching any of the women was distasteful, but suddenly my eye was caught by a short, stockily built man with sandy hair, wearing an ill-fitting evening coat, on the left lapel of which was pinned a white carnation. This recalled my own floral adornment. The sandy-haired man and I were the only men present who wore flowers. I wondered if his coat was moth-eaten. Then I strolled across the room toward him. I fancied he looked somewhat frightened as he saw me approaching, and this put me more at my ease. "My friend," I said, smiling, "you and I alone of all the company, it seems, are wearing white carnations." He looked at me quickly, came a little closer, and made, I thought, a very odd reply. "Love before all," he said, and he stammered over the words. Then he looked as though he were sorry he had said them. "I echo the sentiment," I replied, laughing. "It is an admirable one while the love lasts." On second thought I asked, "Is that the language of the flower we wear?" The sandy-haired man did not reply. He was looking at me very dubiously. "I did not expect to see you here," he said at length. "My meeting with you is an equally unlooked-for pleasure," I replied lightly. "May I ask who you are?" "Certainly. My name is Felton." "Why do you wear that flower?" "Ah, for a private reason." "Are you a friend of hers?" "There are not too many who would call me by that name just now," I said. "If you will tell me which particular she you refer to—" If it is the one I mean, you needn't be afraid to mention her name to me. But I must be cautious as well as you." Now all this was only idle chatter on my part, simply to supply myself with occupation, that Sammis's suspicions might be allayed. The mysterious red-haired man was mildly amusing, too, but when he asked, "Do you know of the accident to Chase?" I felt some irritation. "My friend," I answered, "you are much better at interrogating than at answering, but I'll reply to that question. I know all about the accident to Chase. I know all about everything, why you wear a white carnation and all." He stared at me incredulously for a minute and then said, "In that case, what are you going to do?" As he spoke, I looked over his head and into the eyes of a tall, beautiful young woman who was regarding me intently. I could have sworn she smiled. Certainly her eyes looked an invitation. "I am going to bid you good evening," I said to the red-haired man, and moved away in the direction of the lady. As I approached her, something told me this was Sammis's daughter. There was even a faint likeness in the curve of her red lips to the mouth of the old man. Both expressed a powerful will and courage indomitable. I fancied she grew a shade paler, and her eyes swept the room. I also gave a hurried glance about. Sammis was not visible. I was quite near her now, and suddenly she leaned forward and whispered, "The White Carnation." My reply must have been an inspiration. "Love before all," I whispered back. She flushed beautifully. "Mr. Chase?" she murmured. "Mr. Chase has met with an accident," I said in a low voice. Her face expressed blank dismay. "And you? You come in his place? Are you from Mr. Brandon?" It was my turn to look at her blankly. "From Edgar Brandon?" I stammered. "Certainly," she said with some impatience. "Has anything happened to Edgar? Speak quickly." "No, nothing, and I am his friend." She looked greatly relieved, and as she moved away slowly she whispered, "Come to the conservatory in half an hour. I shall be there, and we can talk freely." With what eagerness I looked about for the red-haired man. His mystery, which I had thought rather stupid at first, now held the strongest fascination for me. It seemed to be her mystery, too. I saw he had crossed the room and was standing near the door. I went over to him and drew him into the hall. The orchestra was playing softly, and I got him behind a palm tree. "Now tell me everything," I said. "You must excuse my rudeness a while ago. Edgar Brandon is my best friend. I will do anything to serve him. You have just seen Miss Sammis speak with me. I swear you may trust me." "They're to elope this evening, Brandon and she," he replied. "But you must know that. Chase, Brandon's friend, was to have come here half an hour before the time, enter the house as one of the guests, help her to escape through the conservatory window, and get her to the carriage. He is a stranger to Miss Sammis, and the sign was to be a white carnation. The password I have already given you. Chase sprained his ankle badly this afternoon. He can't walk. Brandon was desperate. He asked me to come in Chase's place. I can tell you one thing, though. I don't like the job, and I'll tell you another. Unless I'm greatly mistaken, the old man—" He stopped suddenly, his eyes looking past me. I turned and saw the old man at my elbow. "May I speak to you a moment?" he asked. I bowed, and he led the way down the hall, through the dining room, and beyond it to a small room. He closed the door, and, turning, stood regarding me with compressed lips. I felt very uncomfortable. "May I ask your name?" he said at length. "Felton," I replied promptly. "I do not think I have met you before, have I?" I was vexed beyond measure at this inopportune discovery. I cast about in my mind for some wild tale to account for my presence in the house. I had almost determined to throw myself upon his hospitality, anything to gain another hour. Meanwhile I had answered "no" to his question. "Then if I make a mistake you must pardon me. You are not one of the men from the Central Office?" I could have shouted aloud with glee. I was taken for a detective. "I am, sir," I answered. "I recognized your friend as coming from there, but I was not sure of you until I saw you talking to him just now. You look like a gentleman." He was delightful, this old man, and my heart really warmed toward him. The smile with which I answered him was genuine. "There are 4 of you here, are there not?" he asked. "There are, sir." "Well, 3 will be enough to watch those gimcracks in there," jerking his head toward the drawing-room. "I have a much more important matter I am going to entrust to you. Look at this." He held the bit of paper toward me. I took it and read, "Shall be at the corner of Madison Avenue with the carriage at 11. C. will be in the house half an hour earlier. Aid him in playing his part. Courage, my dearest one. Love before all. E." I frowned over the paper and shook my head sagely. "This," continued the old man, "was brought to me this evening by my daughter's maid. It comes from a blackguard named Brandon, Edgar Brandon, whom I have forbidden the house. He intends to run away with my girl tonight, under my nose. I mean to stop the business." "And you wish my services in the matter?" I asked. "I do. I wish you not to let her out of your sight. I'd like to catch her in the very act of running away, and if it wasn't for the scandal it would make, I'd drag her back and humiliate her before her guests. I wish to teach the minx such a lesson as will forever prevent her attempting such a thing again. As for the man—" He stopped, his jaw closing like a trap, and his mouth looking very ugly. My heart was rapidly cooling toward Mr. Sammis. I studied the paper critically while I did some rapid thinking. My plan began to unfold itself, incompletely as yet, but one stroke, a bold one, I decided upon now. "Who is the C referred to in the note?" I asked. "That I do not know," he replied. "Then I think I can inform you," I said in an assured tone. "You? How is that?" "You are a very shrewd man, Mr. Sammis, to have recognized me as a detective so quickly," I replied. "You are the first who has ever done so on an occasion like this." The old fox was not averse to a little flattery. I saw his iron jaw relax. "Where your keenness is at fault is in regard to our friend with the sandy hair whom we left in the hall. Such a man could not come from the central office. Look at his nervous fingers, his anxious eyes. I spotted him right away as a suspect and entered into conversation with him. I had just learned his name was Carruthers when you came up. This note makes it clear. He is the C referred to. My belief is he has had the boldness to enter your house in the guise of a guest for the purpose of helping your daughter to get away." "God save us!" cried Sammis. "But you are a clever one. Upon my soul, I believe you are right." "I am certain of it," I answered. "Now, this requires careful handling. First, I must ask what your wishes are. Do you wish this man Carruthers put out of the house and the whole business stopped at once?" "By no means. Not at all. I wish to catch them in the act of running away. Stop her on the sidewalk, on the way to the rascal's carriage, if possible. I wish to leave no loophole for any lies or explanations." "Then I know just how to act. Do you put the matter in my hands?" "Absolutely." I was beginning to like him again. "The first thing I shall do will be to make an excuse for speaking to your daughter. Perhaps I may get a point from her, perhaps not. That depends. At any rate, Carruthers, after seeing us talking together, can easily be persuaded that I am a friend of Brandon's, now that you have given me his name, and so play right into our hands." "Capital! Suppose I present you to my daughter?" "My dear sir," I said deprecatingly, "that would be to spoil everything. I have my own methods. Trust all to me." A few minutes afterward I sauntered up to Miss Sammis in the drawing-room. "Stand here a few minutes, as though chatting with me," I said. "Then lead the way to the conservatory. It will be all right. You need not fear to be observed." One of the artists from the opera had just risen to sing, and the guests were bestowing themselves to listen. We left the room quietly. We stood facing each other in the conservatory. I said, gently, "You have need of all your courage. I have just left your father. Your maid has played you false, and has given him Edgar's note sent you today. He thinks I am a detective, and has told me everything. I am supposed to be watching you." She turned very pale, but her mouth, a moment ago so soft and smiling, was now firm as Sammis's own. "The woman must have stolen other letters then. This explains my being watched so closely of late. Will you tell me what your father has against Brandon? At first it was only an absurd ambition for me to make what he calls a brilliant match. Then Edgar met with some loss in his business. The amount was exaggerated, but my father believed the worst. It was then that he became very bitter against Edgar. She had unwittingly dealt me a hard blow, and I reddened under it. I, then, was the indirect cause of her unhappiness. "I do not know who you are," said the poor girl, "but I must trust you. I do trust you." "You do well," I said, "for indeed it is necessary. Listen, Miss Sammis. I shall not stop to explain my presence here, for we have a bold game to play, and time is precious. Only believe this, Edgar Brandon was once a dear friend of mine. I am still his friend, though not now in his favor. To be restored to it I will stop at nothing. You, who love him so, can understand this feeling, can you not?" Her eyes grew beautifully soft and tender as she bent her head. "It is now nearly 11 o'clock, and Edgar must be outside. Where is your maid?" "She was to wait for me under this window." She ran toward it and looked out. "The girl is not there," she said. "Now, this is what you are to do. Go upstairs and send the maid down with your things to the appointed place. Have her wear a long, dark cloak, with a hood if possible. Has she such a garment? Good. You yourself bring a wrap, light in color, something distinctively yours. First, though, show me how to reach the yard through the rear of the house." I followed her out through dimly lighted rooms to a hall from which a side door opened. "This leads to the yard," she said. I opened it and looked out on the dark space, about 12 feet wide, and on the line of carriages across the street. "Now return to the drawing-room," I said. "Look for a short man with sandy hair and wearing a white carnation. Speak to him without fear, and send him to me at this door. He should be here in 5 minutes. 15 minutes later, come to the door yourself and open it. You will find me on the steps outside. Can you be ready so soon?" "In half the time," she replied. "Brave girl. Now go. Don't be afraid. Your father will not stop you." In a few minutes I heard the sound of hurried, uncertain footsteps approaching, and Brandon's friend appeared. I opened the side door and drew him out upon the steps, closing the door softly and adjusting the latch that I might open it again. "Whew!" he breathed softly, but with great relief. "A million wouldn't tempt me back inside that house." "Carruthers," I said. "I don't know your name, but for tonight it's Carruthers. Our work is just beginning." In a few words I told him as much of my interview with Sammis as I thought best. "Run down to Madison Avenue and find Brandon's cab. Tell him to drive up to within 50 feet of the house, and to have his cab door open. At the instant Miss Sammis is lifted in, he is to drive down Madison Avenue like the wind. Down Madison Avenue, that is important, no matter where he is going. Now, do you understand?" "Yes, but I have no hat." "We'll both have to sacrifice our hats and coats for tonight, Carruthers, but it's in a great cause. Love before all, you know." I laughed and gave him a push toward the gate as I said, "Come back here instantly and stand well below the door, in the shadow." I crossed the street, found my own four-wheeler, and bade the driver bring the vehicle up to the house opposite the side gate. I took all the bills in my pocket and thrust them into his hand as I gave him explicit instructions what he was to do. He promised faithful obedience. "Mind," I concluded, "the instant you get the word go, you are to drive like mad up Fifth Avenue. Don't stop within 20 blocks, no matter what you hear." I ran back up the steps. My heart was beating rapidly, for the crucial moment was approaching. I had Sammis and the maid yet to deal with. As I reached the top step, the door opened, and the maid appeared. She started at seeing me, but I put my finger to my lips. "I am sent by Mr. Sammis to stop this thing," I said, "though your mistress does not know it. Come, don't be afraid. I know all about the note." The girl plainly mistrusted me, but went, unwillingly, toward the conservatory window, underneath which I bade her stand. The spot was a dark one, about a dozen yards from the side door. I noted with satisfaction that she wore a long dark wrap with a hood. She carried in her hands a small bag. And now for Sammis. What if, in the meantime, he had grown suspicious, and had spoken to one of the real detectives. I should be exposed, and our scheme ruined. One glance at his face when I saw him reassured me. The drawing-room was almost deserted, the guests being at supper. Sammis was watching for me and came toward me instantly. "Mr. Sammis," I said, "things have come our way better than I dared to hope. I have got from that fool Carruthers the whole story of their plans. Both he and your daughter think I am a friend of Brandon's. Come into the conservatory. We can talk better there." I was drawing him toward it as I spoke. "Brandon is here. He is waiting in a carriage down near the end of the line. Look out of the window, just opposite the gate, and you will see a cab which I have sent for. It is this vehicle I intend your daughter to enter, but when she steps inside it, instead of Brandon, I wish her to find her father. Will not this be proof in its most convincing form that she is running away? In the meantime, I shall see that Mr. Brandon is detained, that you may deal with him as you see fit." The dramatic element in this appealed to Sammis, for he whispered, "Good, good," several times and shook my hand warmly. "I shall remember you handsomely for this," he said in my ear. "Your approval is sufficient," I answered. "But come, there is no time to lose. Your daughter may come here at any moment. Let us go through the window." I jumped down on the grass, and Sammis followed quickly. He was wonderfully spry for his years. The maid stood in the shadow where I had left her. "Will you just speak a word to this young woman here, Mr. Sammis?" I whispered. "I fear she doesn't quite trust me." When he saw the maid cloaked with bag in hand, he seemed greatly surprised. I did not like the look which I felt rather than saw on his face as he turned toward me. For a moment I feared I had gone too far. "Everything has proceeded exactly according to the original program," I said. "Your daughter expected her maid to attend her. I did not wish to arouse her suspicions." "Certainly, certainly, you are right," he said. "Louise, in everything you are to do exactly as this gentleman bids you." We crossed the grass plot silently, hurried through the gate, and in another minute I had him safe inside my cab. I looked up toward Madison Avenue and saw Carruthers coming toward me. Things were timing themselves beautifully. He slipped in the side gate and joined me near the rear of the house. "All right," he whispered. "A four-wheeler with 2 black horses. The door stands open. Brandon knows what to do." I signed him to stay where he was and tiptoed up the steps to the side door, which I opened. "I am here," came a soft voice from within. "Hand me out your wrap," I whispered. She did so. It was a pearl-gray one with a lace-trimmed hood. I crept along the shadow of the house to where the maid stood motionless. "Your mistress has brought the wrong wrap, and is afraid to come out," I whispered. "It is absolutely necessary that she does so. She wishes the one you have. Quick, take it off." She obeyed at once. "You are a bright girl, and Mr. Sammis is greatly pleased with you," I said. "You'd better put this thing on. It's chilly here. It shall be yours after this business is ended." She fingered the soft, fleecy thing with evident delight and draped it over her shoulders. "Now, I am going to see that the young lady doesn't get away. When I send my partner, the other detective, for you, go with him to the carriage where Mr. Sammis is. In case there is any fainting, we may need you. Give me that bag. You don't wish to be bothered with it." At last the supreme moment had come. I crept back to Carruthers and, with a last whispered word or two, pushed him toward the maid. I saw him lead her out to the gate, drawing the hood of the wrap over her head as he walked beside her. The door of the cab opened. Carruthers picked the girl up and seemed to fling her inside. "Go!" he shouted, slamming the door, and the horses dashed toward Fifth Avenue. I ran up the steps. "Now!" I cried, and in an instant Miss Sammis was beside me. I seized her hand, and we ran full speed up the dark side street toward Madison Avenue. I saw the black horses, the open cab door, and in a moment she was lifted into arms ready to receive her. I scrambled after her as the horses bounded forward, and as we turned the corner on 2 wheels, I looked out and saw the figure of Carruthers alone on the sidewalk, waving us a hilarious farewell. She lay within the shelter of his arms, her eyes closed. She was a brave girl, but I could see by her pallor as we dashed past the street lamps how sorely her courage had been tried. Brandon looked down at her lovely face, having eyes for nothing else. I put my head out of the window. No pursuing carriage was in sight. "You are in no danger now," I said. "Do you wish to drop me or take me on to the station?" Brandon started. "Who is that?" he asked sharply. "It can't be." He leaned forward and looked at me. "Edgar, you said once you never wished to see me until you had forgotten. I have tried to be of some service to you tonight. Perhaps you can forgive, some day." She opened her eyes. "He saved me for you, Edgar. My maid betrayed me. Father was informed of everything, but he brought me safely through the danger. I do not know his name even, but he shall be my friend and yours forever." Brandon reached forward and pressed my hand in the darkness. The story was told briefly as we dashed through 23rd Street toward the river. Not until we were on the other side and out of New York State did we breathe freely. There were still a few minutes before the train left. Edgar had brought out from somewhere a traveling cap and made me put it on. The last thing he did as we all sat together in the car was to scribble something with a fountain pen in a little book held on his knee. He tore out a check and handed it to me. "You can serve me while I am gone, Dick," he said. "A great rise is coming in Consolidated Steel. Buy all you can, and, for Brandon and Felton, we are partners and friends again, my boy." As I came back alone on the ferry, a gentle breeze was blowing up from the bay. The odor of the White Carnation was wafted pleasantly to my nostrils. I looked toward the dark city across the water, and again thought of Alice Lazari. Tomorrow I would go to see her. Tomorrow. A distant bell boomed out midnight, and suddenly I remembered that it was the hour at which I was to die. I had quite forgotten it. Then I laughed softly. How much better it was to live. End of The White Carnation by Francis Livingston.